The world's best mountain bikers rolling to Plymouth for the British leg of the Grundig World Cup series. Welcome to Newnham Park on the edge of Dartmoor for the penultimate round of the Mountain Bike World Cup. This is one of the best courses in the country, and though it's new to this series, the Brits know it well. Former top British rider Nicky Crowther looks at previous winners here.
Tim Gould won the first national race here in '91. '92 saw his former teammate David Baker take first, and he repeated the win in the mud of May this year. The course has also been a favourite of Deb Murrell's, with wins in '92 and earlier this year, while Caroline Alexander has failed to finish after 3 attempts.
The course itself is an 8.7-mile loop with 4 river crossings. It has over 1,200 feet of climbing per lap, with the highest point being 600 feet up on Dartmoor. There are a number of tricky technical sections, such as the tabletop in the woods and the bomb holes. But the main spectator point will no doubt be the tricky pipeline descent. First off are the women, so let's find out who's who and how they've been doing.
A knee injury forced Julie out of skiing and into mountain biking. In 1990 she became world cross-country champ, and she currently holds the world downhill title.
A former World Championship bronze medalist on the road, Alison had an immediate impact when she started mountain biking in 1991 and was second at last year's World Championships.
Another former road rider, Ruthie, was bronze medalist in '90 and '92 and world champion in '91. She was also the winner of the World Cup series last year.
Bronze medalist at the '91 World and world and European champion last year, Sylvia is still looking for her first win in the World Cup series.
Susan's great strength is climbing, but she also has a consistency that has netted her many top 3 places in the World Cup series, including a win at last year's final.
Another strong climber, Caroline is Britain's best hope in the Grundigs, having won the national championship a fortnight ago and silver medal at the European Championships last week. After the previous 8 rounds, Julie is the clear leader, having won every race. The battle is now for second, and after a good start to the series, Caroline will be hoping to move back into the top 5 with a good result at home. As the gun went off for the start of the women's 3-lap race, the disappointing news was that neither Julie Furtado nor Alison Seidel were competing. Furtado was out with a knee injury and Seidel was racing at the World Road Race Championships in Norway. So we were sure of a different winner in this race, and first to take up the challenge was Caroline Alexander, who led the field up the first climb in front of a huge crowd. But by the bottom of the pipeline descent, Lisa Muick, a former downhill world champion, had opened a slight gap on Alexander and the Canadian Jill Smith, who raced here in somewhat more tricky conditions in May. Though the pipeline was still taking victims, first to go the American Susan DeMattei. Sian Roberts was another Brit in the top 15 at the start. Coming into the second river crossing, Muick had maintained her lead, but appeared to have no chance of shaking off the attentions of a chasing group of 4, led by Susan DeMattei. The next 2 were Smith and the recently crowned European champion Chantal Decour, who was having back problems and was dropping down the field. As they hit the open moorland on the way up to the top of the course, Caroline was back in front and setting a tempo that Muick and DeMattei were finding hard to live with. Jill Smith was looking comfortable though, as she moved back up the field ahead of Ruthie Matthes and Sylvia First. Ruthie looked as though she was having to work harder than she would like so early in the race. On the way back down, the group had reformed behind Caroline and were letting her do the work. Obviously they were happier with her pace going down than going up. On her own in 7th, Tammy Jacks was making little impression on the leaders, but she was aware of a chasing group of 4 behind her, led by Sarah Ballantyne, ahead of Decour, Sarah Ellis and Britain's second rider Deb Murrell, who was having a stormer and would be delighted with this position. With temperatures in the high 20s, she was wisely taking water on at every opportunity. And as the field headed down to the 3rd river crossing, there was no change at the front. rejoining the race on lap 2, and it was now Susan DeMattei who was setting the pace ahead of Matthes, Smith and Muick. Caroline Alexander had dropped off of the back of the group on the long descent at the end of the lap, but as they started to climb, she was again looking strong and moving back through the pack, egged on by the crowd. While it was reigning world champion Sylvia First, who was now losing touch with the group. Into the bong holes, and DeMattei was piling on the pressure as she tried to open a possible race-winning lead. Now it's Caroline's turn to chase. Back on the climb, Deb Murrell was still comfortable in her group, and if she can maintain 10th place, that would be her best ever result against this opposition, and I'm sure the crowd were contributing to her ride. Picking up the leader along the fast single track on the moors, and DeMattei was trying to stay away as she descends into the woods. But by the time they started climbing again, Ruthie Matthes was leading the chase and gradually reeling Susan back in. Ruthie was looking much better than at the beginning of the race, having obviously fully warmed up, while close behind in third, Jill was also looking good. And as the race continued to seesaw at the front, those three had opened a 20-second gap on First and Muick. While a further 30 seconds down, Caroline seemed to be paying for her earlier attacks, dismounting lower down the slope than the other riders.
One of the most important judgments that top mountain bikers have to make is when to not ride something. Apart from losing time if they fail to make it, they may also be using more energy riding than getting off and running, especially if you can get on and off a bike as stylishly as this. However, it's not only going up, but also down, when it can be more sensible and less painful to get off and run. But even the best can get it wrong sometimes.
Approaching the end of the second lap, Susan DeMattei was still trying to go it alone, but now her lead was down to just 5 seconds over Matthes and Smith, who seemed to be working together. Meanwhile in fourth, Sylvia had had a second wind and opened up a 20-second gap on Lisa Muick, who was flying over the jumps, determined not to lose touch. While Alexander was nearly another minute down and would have to go some if she was going to get a win in front of the home crowd. Down the pipeline on the third and final lap, and Ruthie Matthes had taken the lead for the first time, but was only seconds ahead of DeMattei. While a tumble saw Jill Smith lose touch with the leaders just as the hammer was going down. Sylvia First had punctured, which let Lisa Muick back into fourth, and she wasn't easing off a touch, aware that behind her, Caroline, who was now 45 seconds down, could find the crowd worth an extra pair of legs on the last lap. By the time the leaders were heading down to the second river crossing, it was obvious that the battle for first would be between DeMattei and Matthes, with Jill Smith now a minute off the pace in third. As they started to climb back up to the moors, Ruthie realised that this was where Susan, an excellent climber, would attack. So her task was to stay right on DeMattei's wheel, which also has a demoralising effect on the leader. Still together as they approached the penultimate river crossing, Ruthie, who was obviously feeling confident, decided to take control. Though as they headed down from the forest single track wheel to wheel, it looked like it would go right to the wire. Behind them, Jill Smith was left to consolidate her third position, nearly a minute ahead of Lisa Muick. And as the leaders approached the final river crossing, just yards from the line, Susan DeMattei chose the wrong gears for sprinting, and that gave Ruthie the chance she was looking for, as she took her first Grundig World Cup win of the year.
Coming towards the finishing line, a big hand, ladies and gentlemen, for Ruthie Matthes from Richie, right on her heel. A fantastic ride from Ruthie Matthes from Diamondback.
So as Susie and Ruthie congratulate each other on a great race, Jill Smith came home for a well-deserved third.
1 minute and 12 seconds, and at last she's got the victory over
Whilst Caroline Alexander was surprised to find that she too would be having a sprint, this time for fifth with Sylvia First, who had managed an incredibly quick punch repair. And Caroline only just edged her out, but after a hard race, she didn't need that sprint.
I figured Caroline would have a really strong ride. I know she was second in the European Championships last weekend. And when she took off from the gun, I thought, oh, this is trouble, you know, because it's really hard to say in a mountain bike race. Usually when a woman goes from the gun and, you know, goes that fast, she stays. Not too many come back. So I was definitely a little worried.
I think in hindsight maybe went a little bit too hard because I got carried away with the crowd. Everybody was going crazy and I wanted to be at the front, and the other girls played that to their advantage because they sat behind me, and it's a lot easier to follow a wheel than it is to lead.
Well, Caroline may be disappointed for the moment, but Ruthie was a deserving victor of one of the best women's mountain bike races ever, and Deb Murrell finished with an excellent 9th. After the break, it's the men's event. So what kind of race are we in for?
Unlike road racing, where the average speed is about 30 miles an hour, mountain bikers usually travel at about 15. So there's little advantage to be gained by drafting other riders, except on the fast sections. So some riders, such as John Tomac and Tim Gould, like to lead from the start. That way they can get a clear ride on the technical sections and avoid trouble. Other riders, such as David Baker and the world champion Henrik Denis, prefer to play a waiting game. Just by sitting on their opponent's wheel, they can demoralise them. Then, when the time is right, such as with Baker's attack at last year's Worlds, they can utterly destroy them.
We'll see which tactics come to the fore after the break.